All right, well, that is our next focus on this show today, and our guest is in Abuja. Mark?
Well, thank you, Chamberlain. We're now being joined by Mr. Festus Okoye, who is a National Commissioner and Chairman, Information and Voter Education Committee at INEC. Yes, INEC is the Independent National Electoral Commission. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily.
Good morning.
Yeah, just about a week ago, there was a conversation held. Yeah, this conversation was held about a week ago, I think, within an academic premises, and the conversation bordered around voter apathy. And INEC is concerned that the numbers seem to be declining in terms of the interest of voters to participate in the continuous voter registration and also their participation in the polls. Is that right?
That is true.
What exactly is the concern of INEC on this one?
Well, you know, the democracy is all about participation, and the Commission wants the Nigerian people to engage the electoral process and make their own contributions in terms of the choices they make. Now, we had a situation where, I think in 2015, the voter turnout was around 44%, and then during the 2019 elections, it went down to around 34.7%. So we are worried and concerned that there's a gradual disengagement of the Nigerian people from the electoral process. So we convened a dialogue with some academics and civil society groups and the media to try to find out why this downward spiral and the ways and means of reversing that particular spiral.
How did the conversation go? What came out of the conversation, especially from the part of the academics? I don't know. Let's start from there before we go into other areas.
Well, in the analysis,
yes,
several issues were put on the table. And one of the issues that was put on the table relates to the whole issue about the trust deficit between the Nigerian people, the political elite, the electoral management body, and the security agencies. The trust was that the Nigerian people believe in democracy, and the Nigerian people are actively engaged with the democratic process, and they want to go to the polls to make their own choices. But there are some variables, there are some issues, and there are some concerns they have that has made it really impossible for quite a number of them to go to the polling units to go and express their democratic choices. And so these were some of the issues we analyzed. First is that there are some people who believe that no matter the choices they make, that their votes will never count. And they attribute this to, one, the fact that most of the political parties share almost the same ideology, and that voting for one is also akin to voting for the other one. The second issue they raised relates to the issue of security at the polling units. Most of them believe that they should go to the polling units, cast their votes in a very conducive atmosphere, and go home, rather than going to the polling units to go and vote and die. Because sometimes you see a very, very unwholesome atmosphere at the polling units. So they express concern about that. They also express concern relating to some of our processes. The fact that sometimes, due to some exigencies, the Commission does not deploy on time, and this discourages the voters. So many issues were put on the table on how to deal with this whole issue of voter apathy and re-engage the Nigerian people back with the electoral process, because the Nigerian people are really enthusiastic about democracy. Okay,
now, bringing in other parts. The question for me is, did INEC ever really have the figures which it claims it had? So, for instance, the figures from 1999, there have been big questions around those figures, 1999 progressing up to 2003, then 2007. Even INEC itself was able to say that we've cleaned out the register. We are ensuring that, you know, it is the people who actually come out to vote whose votes are really counted. And some people will say you have made progress in that regard. The question then is, did we really have the figures which you now claim are going down?
I need to be honest with you. There are challenges. If you look at our voters register, 70.2% of those who are enrolled in the voters register were enrolled before the 2011 elections. So with the 2019 elections, the voters register is almost 9 years old. And by the time we get to the 2023 elections, it will be 12 years old. Now, if you look at the World Bank report in terms of adult mortality, it says that at least 348 adults die within a span of 1,000. So the implication is that between the time we had the voters register and when we get to the 2023 elections, there will have been thousands and thousands of persons who are still on the voters register who are not supposed to be on the voters register. So the issue is, what is it that we need to do to clean up our voters register to make sure that only eligible voters who are alive that are on the register? And we are working on that. We are setting processes and procedures on how to revise the voters register to clean up the voters register. But one thing is clear: we hardly have accurate data of births and deaths. Secondly, when we display the voters register for claims and objections, very few Nigerians come out to come and identify the fact that their father is dead or their mother is dead or some people have died in their communities. So that is also a very, very serious concern in relation to what we do. But we are working assiduously to make sure that we clean up the voters register and make it really a people's voters register.
So if I also get you correctly, what you're looking at is the proportion of people who come out to vote in relation to the number of people you have on the voters register. Is that correct?
Exactly. That's the point. And you must also realize the fact that, one, on election day, for instance, during the 2019 elections, yes, we deployed over 1 million ad hoc staff. Mm-hmm. At least half of these ad hoc staff are registered voters, and they don't vote. There were police personnel and other security agencies that were deployed on essential services. Some of them are registered, and they do not vote. There were also people who are on essential services working in the electricity sector and so on and so forth who do not vote. So we're also looking at a situation where we can have early voting system so that these categories of persons who are on the voters register can cast their votes before going for the essential duties. So some of these things contribute to the low voter turnout that we have on election day. And we are looking seriously at addressing some of them. I'm glad that you're already looking in that area, especially yes, when you also think of the fact that journalists oftentimes are affected as well. That is true. But the reason I put this question in terms of when you look at the number of people who actually come out to vote vis-a-vis the number of people you have on the register, this is not to say that there isn't any apathy. Yes. But when you look at, and I think you've already started talking about some of the processes, the fact that in some instances, people have changed addresses. It's still, yes, it's still a little cumbersome to be able to, register at your new polling unit, yes, and things of the sort. You cannot just transfer like that. There are also questions as to whether or not we have been able to look at the actual, only recently, let me make it easy. Only recently, the REC, Resident Electoral Commissioner in Cross River State, yes, in Akwa Ibom, beg your pardon, came out to say that before now, they didn't used to conduct elections, they wrote results. And that, oftentimes when these things happen, this is my own inference from that, yes, is that they will look at the number of people on the register and allocate results based on that. Did we really have the figures in the very first instance when we still have senior members of INEC coming out to say that in many instances, elections were never really conducted? There was like a sort of consensus amongst elites in those areas. I don't have the capacity and the competence to really talk on whether elections have been conducted in some areas or whether elections have not been conducted in some areas. But the law, as of today, is that when you want to measure the incidence of overvoting, you look at the number of the voters on the voters register and then relate the number from EC8A to make a determination on whether there has been overvoting. Now, the smart card reader that the Commission introduced and which has assisted in cleaning up our electoral process was meant to, one, verify the voter and also authenticate the voters' biometrics by making sure that the person who has come to the polling unit with the permanent voter's card is the actual voter who registered and whose picture is on the voters register and whose data is on the smart card reader, so that you make sure that only the registered voter comes to vote. But in some instances, people have attempted to sort of bypass the smart card reader by making sure that the smart card reader is not used for an election. No. Sorry to interrupt you. Yes. I think that you've hit the nail on the head. I think a question I'm going to ask you is, or point out, is that some people will say that the smart card reader has been a game changer Yes.
If it has been, have we been able to compare the figures we used to get before the smart card reader was introduced and now that the smart card reader has been introduced? How significantly different are the figures that we're seeing of people at the polls?
Well, I don't have any data relating to that. But what I want to say is that in places where we have used the smart card reader or where the smart card reader has been robustly used, you can see that the figure between the winners and the first runner-up, if you allow me to use that expression, has been very, very low, showing that truly the will of the people in some of those instances has been allowed to play. But you know, before, you have moonslide, you have sea slide, and so on and so forth. That no longer happens. So our resolve now is to strengthen the regime of the smart card reader by making sure that we integrate all our processes into one, so that at the end of the day, what will be at play and what will be the game changer will be the figure on the smart card reader and the figure of accredited voters, and no longer the figure on the voters register. Because if you use the smart card reader as the base and the core of the accreditation process and as a measure of overvoting, some of these issues of trying to bypass the smart card reader will no longer be there. So we are looking at all our processes and we are trying to refashion our processes to make sure that we get them ready for the 2023 elections. Nigerians are clamoring that they want a situation where their votes will be made to count. And what we are doing now is to, one, make sure that we look at how we can transmit the results of the election directly from the polling unit and also transmit the results of the elections directly from the collation centers, so that at the end of the day, we make sure that the figure that has been electronically transmitted corresponds with the manual figure that has been written at the polling units. And to that particular extent, we are going to make sure that, at least with the off-season Edo and Ondo elections that is coming up, that we experiment with some of these processes and see how far we can go with them before we introduce the more robust changes with the 2023 elections.
Well, I also do not know how, we can be complaining of voter apathy if we really haven't broken down the figures to this, to see what a big difference the smart card reader has made before and after it was introduced.
Yes.
But also, the question of making things a lot easier. Yes. For people to be able to change their polling unit shouldn't be rocket science. I, for one, forget the fact that I'm a journalist. I moved from Lagos to Abuja, and we know that it's a process to be able to, register in another polling unit. Is INEC looking at some of the difficulties that, might discourage everyday Nigerians from saying, look, this is too much stress. I cannot go through this just because of elections?
Well, we are looking at all these things. The first issue we are looking at is how to break down the polling units to make them more accessible and more voter-friendly. As of today, we have not been in a position to create additional polling units, and that's why we have created voting points here and there. But we are looking at a situation where some of these voting points will translate into polling units and move to more accessible places and places that are nearer to the people. But you see, anytime you want to create additional polling units, people believe that you are trying to increase the figure of the registered voters in some places. Creating additional polling units does not tamper with or touch on the number of registered voters. So we want to break all the polling units into 500 each, so that people can vote more conducively and then go home. And we also move them to more accessible places. Some of our voting some of the places where we vote are really, really appalling. Some of the primary schools do not have facilities at all. So we are going to engage all the local government chairpersons, engage all the state governments to make sure that they even improve facilities in some of these places. It's only the Electoral Commission of Nigeria that supplies water. During elections, we buy GP tanks and put in some of the collation centers and in some of the rack centers. We supply our own electricity, we buy generators and put in these places. So we want the state governments to do some of these things so that we can concentrate on other issues.
Just before we go to my colleague in Lagos, let me quickly bring in this question of trust, which is at the bottom of this all. If the people do not trust the process, is INEC working on additional measures of transparency?
Exactly. We are working on additional measures of transparency. The Electoral Commission has never claimed that it doesn't have any form of blame in relation to the trust deficit in our electoral process. Sometimes our processes are slow in terms of deployment to the polling units. Now, but you need to see the synergy between our deployment and the security issues involved. If we do not have security at the rack centers, we cannot deploy because what the presiding officers and other categories of staff are carrying are sensitive materials and non-sensitive materials. So if we do not have security, we cannot deploy on time. If the security is compromised in any polling unit, we cannot deploy. So we are also trying to work out a framework, a new security matrix with the security agencies that allows us to deploy on time, that allows the voters to vote in a conducive atmosphere.
That's not the question I was asking, but let's quickly go to Lagos now and take a question from Ayo.
Yes, there is this, Mr. Okoye, there is this opinion by Christopher Fagunwa, who spoke at one forum that INEC organized. In fact, this particular document is on the website of INEC, and he says on page 25 that the inability but not unwillingness of the electoral body to manage and administer elections credibly has affected the confidence of the masses in the electoral process. How do you react to that?
Well, you know, the issue of the conduct of election is a shared responsibility. The mandate and the powers of the Independent National Electoral Commission relates to the conduct of elections. The commission does not provide security for the elections. And there are also so many things that the commission does not manage. Now, I agree that in a few instances, we have had problems of deployment. We have also had problems of mix-up in a few polling units. But I believe that the Commission has continued to improve, and we have continued to improve our processes. That is why we changed the voting pattern in most of the polling units to make sure that vote buyers do not compromise the voting process and the voting procedures. We have also robustly been training our presiding officers and other categories of staff to make sure that they clearly and truly understand the electoral process. But if you have a situation where you take young men and women as presiding officers and deploy over 1 million of them, and then you get to the polling unit, their security is compromised, some of them are kidnapped, some of them are harmed, some of them are put under tremendous fear, there is very, very little they can do. But more fundamentally, it is the Nigerian people that conduct these elections. Over 1 million ad hoc staff that are deployed for the conduct of elections are Nigerians. So I believe that the Electoral Commission has been improving on its processes and procedures, and we will continue to improve. But we need the cooperation, and we need the understanding, and also we need the partnership of the other agencies that are also concerned with the electoral process to provide enough security for us.
The question on trust I was asking is about the figures. I mean, you saw what happened with the last elections about INEC, the controversial server question.
Yes.
Do you think that there will be a situation whereby people will be able to see as the figures are coming in and, you know, people are able to monitor and trust better, know what is going on, very much like what they see happening with their monies on their mobile phones?
We are going to open our processes, and we are going to discuss all the new innovations and creative measures we are putting in place with all the critical stakeholders. And we are going to open our processes and our procedures for them to see what we are doing. In fact, in the next few weeks, we are going to have a robust conversation with the different stakeholders in the electoral process to let them know of the direction we are going in terms of transmission of results from the polling units to the first level of the collation center, and also in terms of transmission of results from the collation center, maybe to a central database. So we are going to open our processes. We are resolved to be very, very transparent, and we have really nothing to hide.
Well, that's where we'll leave it. Thank you so much for coming on Sunrise Daily this morning. Festus Okoye is the National Commissioner, Chairman, Information and Voter Education Committee at INEC. Thank you again for coming on Sunrise Daily. The program continues shortly. Please stay with us.
Well, we've got time for just one more thing today.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to let you know that with me today here are my 4 respected wives. Halima can stand up, please. One. Umar, stand up. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. These 4 wives you have seen have produced 27 kids for me, and I'm still counting. I'm still counting.
Need I say more? If that's the kind of... Well, that actually happened on the floor of the House. So the other kind of conversation you have on the floor of the House. So I just wonder.
You know, we get to see that much, power. He eventually went to say he's a powerful man. It'll be good to see how
I was wondering where all that was headed.
You know.
Was there going to be policy direction? And then
Eventually.
I thought...
It'll be good to see that power put into, policies.
I guess I was thinking too much. I was overthinking.
To imagine that is the demonstration of power, that you have power over women. Anyway, as you said.
Man, when they say car is overheating, my brain was overheating. I couldn't handle that. Well, there you go. Well, that's the show. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next week. Okay, go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that, it would have been very appropriate to play the comments of the speaker right after that introduction. Remember that he was being sworn in, and that's why his wives are present right there in the chambers. But the comments of the speaker was quite instructive, and I think that, this kinds of conversations might be very interesting when we bring up the question of population control and things of the sort. But, hey, that's what we have for now.
You never know. So there may be part 2 of that conversation. We'll see you next week. I'm Chamberlain. What's up?
I am Kayode Okikele.
I am Ayo Makinde. Have a wonderful day.